Our second session of the day. It's the theme is education and outreach. So we have 3 papers, I believe. So first up, we are going to be hearing from Nigel Gilmore-Cook from the National Museums of Northern Ireland. Just a gentle reminder to all of our speakers, I'll be holding up your warning signals over there. And if you can please talk into the microphone, and there'll be time for questions. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you all so much for having me. This is my first NATSCA conference. So it's a real big privilege to be presenting alongside what's been some really amazing talks so far. I suppose this is going to be quite a shift from what we've been talking about so far, because now it's learning time, which is, I'm sure everyone will be excited to find out, involving a little bit of audience participation. It's not possible to teach without having a bit of audience participation. So basically over the next little while, I'm going to be talking to you about something that kind of underpins all of the education work I do, which is this idea that there are no silly questions. And we're going to get into that a bit more. So, like I say, a bit of audience participation. To start out with, I would like you to think, and I imagine there's going to be some really interesting ones in this room, what is your earliest nature memory? It could be about an animal, it could be about a plant, it could be about a place. I'd like you to hold that memory in your mind. And I would now like you to raise your hand if that memory is from when you were before the age of 10 years old. Okay, for those at home, a lot of people in the audience raising their hands, great. Now I'd like you to raise your hand if that memory was from before the age of 5 years old. Okay, still a lot of people raising their hand, great. So obviously we're in a room where that question is probably a little biased. There's going to be a lot of people in this room that are going to do that, but I've done this activity at most of the events that I've presented at. And in every room, regardless of the audience and their background, there's always a good number of hands that go up. And so this really demonstrates for us this idea that we all, from our earliest age, have a really deep connection with the natural world, regardless of whether when we grow up, that manifests in any kind of way, whether it's something we do in our career or something we experience in our free time. And my point, I guess, that I'm trying to make is that even if people come to your organization and they don't seem to have an interest in science or the natural world, it's there, it's in there somewhere, and there are ways of kind of bringing that out. So just as an example, my earliest nature memory, I was 4 years old, and at the end of our garden, there were fox cubs playing, and I was looking out my bedroom window and watching them. So that's kind of something that set the tone for my life and my career. So just a little brief overview of what I do at National Museums Northern Ireland. I am the Natural Sciences Education Officer. My role is split between 2 of our museums. So actually the bulk of my role happens here at Ulster Museum. I'm not going to go into lots of detail about my program. Those of you who have signed up for my tour later on will find out a bit more. But basically, I have a range of workshops that are aimed at the entirety of primary and high school age groups. And also I have had engagement with GCSE and A-level groups as well. And all of my programs at their core have a teaching handling collection that I am really, really fortunate to have. My kind of standpoint is, if I don't have objects in my workshop, why am I doing it? Because at the end of the day, that's my USP. You know, the kids can't get that experience when they're at school or when they're in other places. At the Folk Museum, I have an outdoor learning program, which, as you can imagine, in this part of the world, runs through spring and summer term and doesn't get booked at any other point. But one of the elements of that is my Mini Beast workshop, and you can see there that is an actual photograph of a pseudoscorpion that one of the groups found, and the the students from Lynn Primary up in Larne were very, very excited to have found that pseudoscorpion, and we put an iNaturalist record on for that, and they were super excited to have contributed. We also have our Museum on the Move program, which is an online program. This started as a response to the COVID-19 lockdown. Basically, we send objects out to schools, and then our education team dial in via Microsoft Teams, and we have a session in week 1 where we talk through the objects. They then have time to explore them in school, and we have then a session in week 2 where we look at some of the amazing artworks that they've made. As you can see, somebody invented an ocean planet in response to the space session, and we've got a lovely labeled hedgehog there as well. Some of the labeled hedgehogs are amazing. I have one on my office wall that is the roundest hedgehog you've ever seen. I always ensure that in that second session, there's an opportunity for open question and answer. It's amazing when you give, especially children, the opportunity to ask any question they want about space or about animals. Some of the discussions you can have are absolutely brilliant. I'm also lucky enough to lead some student teacher sessions. We have some amazing teaching colleges based in Belfast, and every year the student teachers come to us and we talk a little bit to them about the museum as a resource, but we also give them some ideas for activities to deal with tricky topics like deep time. How do you make that relevant and meaningful to young people? And also I get involved in some public events. So we have an incredible science festival every year in Belfast, and I do some tours in that, and also some events here at the museum for our museum lates, which are adult only. I'll talk a bit more about that later, but it basically gives me an opportunity to get stuck into the really juicy, gruesome stuff about nature that I don't necessarily get to do when the school kids come in. So this brings me around to kind of the key point of my talk. There are no stupid questions and no silly answers, and vice versa, no silly questions and no stupid answers. This is the core tenet of everything that I do with young people and with adult visitors. And it really kind of is the thing that I focus on, because in my experience, there's nothing that's a bigger enthusiasm squasher than feeling belittled or patronized for not knowing something. And so if you can really make it so that whatever question gets asked is met and taken seriously, it makes a big difference. So just some examples of some FAQs that I deal with on a daily basis as part of my school program. So question number 1, why are grey squirrels the evil ones? I get this a lot. The next one is, who would win in a fight, a gorilla or a shark? And question 3, which is the one I get literally every day, is it you who put these animals in the museum? So I actively answer all of these questions. I tell young people and even adults as well that grey squirrels are not evil for successfully outcompeting red squirrels. They are just trying to survive. I tell them in the fight between the gorilla and the shark, what's the arena? Are we fighting in the ocean? Are we fighting in the forest? If I know the context, then I can give you an accurate answer. And last of all, no, I do not run around botanic gardens with a shovel, collecting animals and putting them into the museum. And we go into great detail about what is taxidermy, because once kids understand what taxidermy is and what it is that they're looking at, all of the fear of the unknown immediately sucks out of the room, and then they engage with them, which is great. So I'm going to have a couple of anecdotes during this talk, so hold on tight. Something that I've picked up from 5 years living in Belfast is how to tell a good story. So this first anecdote, I started out my museum education career at the Natural History Museum in Tring, which if you have not been, which is probably unlikely in this room, but if you haven't, go, it's amazing. And we were delivering an Easter activity about egg-laying animals. And I had various animals from the teaching collection under a blanket, and I was giving clues and then revealing the animal. And so the clues I gave for the turtle were, this animal spends most of its time in the ocean, but it comes up onto the beach to lay its eggs. Which animal do you think it could be? and hands went up around the room, and I chose a child to ask. Bearing in mind this was a family activity, it was quite a young child, and the response was donkey. Now, the immediate ripple of laughter through the room, mainly from the adults in the room, was fair enough. It took me off guard at first. But before I responded to that answer, I took a beat to find, where has that come from? Can I trace that answer back to its root? So I said to this child, have you been to the seaside recently? And they said yes. And I said, did you go on a donkey ride while you were there? Yeah, there were donkeys on the beach. And I'm like, that's great. I said, you went to the beach, you saw donkeys there. And so you've thought, well, that's an animal that comes up onto the beach. Maybe that's the right answer. And I said, that's not the animal that we're looking for, but really good try. And in that moment, I'm not just accepting that answer and treating it seriously, but I'm also validating the scientific process that has led to that answer, because it is a scientific process. They've had an experience, they've made an observation, they've tied that back to things I mentioned in my question, and they've come to that conclusion. It might not be the right conclusion, but as we all know, sometimes in science, the finding out that you have the wrong answer is just as scientifically valuable as finding out that you have the right answer. And this kind of shows that really it's all about connections. And this is where I'm going to get my nerd on. In museum contexts, one of the best things that you can do is, when somebody asks you a question or gives you an answer, is to try and dig to the root of that. So a good example is, I was based in our Discover Nature room, and we have a beautiful big amethyst geode. And a child came over to me with his parents, and he said, oh, does that make music? And the parents turned to him and said, what kind of question is that? Don't be silly. And they were going to shoo him on. And I said, oh, have you been playing Minecraft? And he said, yeah. And I said, yeah, the amethyst in Minecraft makes music when you mine it, doesn't it? And he said, yeah, it does. And so we had a whole chat about all the different kind of geology samples and things that he recognizes in the room as being found in Minecraft. And similarly, for anyone who is a big nerd like me and knows their Pokemon, this is Relicanth. And later on, some of you are going to be finding out more about our coelacanth specimen. But I had a similar interaction where a child looked at the coelacanth and said, there's a Pokemon based on that. And I said, yeah, there is. And we had a conversation about it. And so I suppose what I'm trying to say is that you can get to the root of these connections, and you can have really valuable scientific conversations based on them. And another example of this is my second anecdote, which is, I was recently delivering my Investigate Natural History session, which is a very flexible, multi-sensory session. It's designed with SEND classes in mind, but it's also available to anyone who wants to book it. And it's very student-led, so there's lots of discussion. And one child asked, were dragons real? I could see the teacher go to do that sort of jump in and maybe answer for themselves. And I went, oh, do you know what? That's a really good question. So we had a chat, first of all, about, well, why do dragons pop up in myth and legend in cultures across the world? Well, there's been suggested that maybe finding fossils could have led to that, and all of those kinds of things. So we had a bit of that discussion. And another pupil asked a follow-up question and said, well, if dragons were real, how would they fly? So then we used examples of real world flying animals, all of the different ways that they're able to fly. And this is where I brought in, again, the good nerd reference. If anyone's ever never seen the film Reign of Fire, it's quite obscure, even though it has Christian Bale in it. It's a great film about them digging for a new subway tunnel in London and uncovering dragons that have been buried for centuries. It's amazing because it goes into great detail about the biology of the dragons. So for a science nerd, it's a great film to watch, because the whole thing is they breathe fire because they eat ash. So then we had this conversation about how, well, actually, one of the children pointed out, if they had a pouch of flammable gas in their chest, it would help them to fly and it would help them to breathe fire. So we had this amazing discussion that was all theoretical, but it's all grounded in science, because we gave space for those questions to be asked. Next thing, this ties into everything I've just said, use fiction as a tool in your toolkit. If you are not somebody who regularly consumes sci-fi, superhero media, that's fine. But if you can do a little bit of digging when those references come up, and they will come up regularly when you listen to visitors, you'll realize lots of people know more about science than they think they do just from the media that they consume. A lot of people know more about radioactivity than they think just because they know who Hulk is. A lot of people know more about relativity than they think just because they've watched Star Trek. Never mind how well or not well they express the idea of relativity in Star Trek itself. The point of the matter is people have points of reference, and they are things that you can pick on and that you can pull out and use when you engage. Big thing for me, let adults have fun. I don't know when we decide at what point during our school career that we're not allowed to have fun anymore. But at our museum late, it's something I'm really passionate about. And recently we had a museum late, it was in August last year, and I turned our Discover Nature room into Naughty Nature. And I had an activity that was called Who's Junk? And in a bag, I had various household objects, including a corkscrew, a teaspoon, a bag of Monster Munch crisps, and visitors had to match the object with the animal whose genitalia are that shape. This was an incredibly popular activity. As you can imagine, lots of laughs, lots of gasps, lots of innuendo, but it was really, really good fun. And actually, you would be amazed how much random members of the public know about animal genitalia. It really surprised me. I wasn't expecting it. But just to move on a little bit to another topic, and this is where I'm sort of coming to the stuff that actually I'm encountering that is making my job trickier. Misinformation and disinformation is a big issue, especially for young people at the moment. On multiple occasions over my past 5 years in this role, I have encountered primary school pupils telling me that the earth is flat. And this is information that they hear every day from their favorite content creators online. In a discussion about the largest predators on Earth, I had a child vehemently telling me that the bloop was the largest predator on Earth. The bloop is a cryptid creature. It was created in response to a mystery sound that was recorded underwater. I think since it's been attributed to the sound of icebergs shifting, but this child was certain that the bloop existed. Rather than immediately shut that down, I explained that actually we don't have at the moment any evidence of that massive predator existing in the ocean. Doesn't mean it's not out there. We might find it, but at the moment, this is what we know. And I suppose my point is that online information is not all bad. A lot of children gain a lot of interest in things through places like YouTube, Twitch, TikTok. But what's important is getting across that this is not the only place to find knowledge, that there are other sources out there, directing them to sources. Also, what I love is kind of sowing that seed of questioning, because young people are naturally inclined to question. So say, oh, where did you find that information from? What's the content creator? And they'll say whoever it is. It's usually some, very obscure name that I've never heard of. And I'll say, where did they get that information from? Are they a researcher? And they'll say, oh, I don't really know. And you start to sow that seed then of where is that information coming from initially? Where are they getting their information from? Or are they just sat at home thinking it up in front of their camera? And this comes in again to combating other issues like eco-anxiety that is growing in young people. So I have a new workshop called Eco Investigators that I've been doing this academic year. It uses real case studies, real data, everything is referenced, and they take all of this information and they use it to compile a fact file about what the problems are in that part of the world that their case study is from, and then they propose solutions. And what I'm trying to do with this is not only teach scientific process, but also that ability to use sources to compile information. And what this does is it gives young people a sense of empowerment. It tells them they can go out and do this for themselves. They can research, they can come up with ideas for the future. Now, are all of the ideas practical? In the case of the group that came up with the idea of getting rid of invasive rats on Rathlin Island, which is just off the north coast, by engineering a virus to target the invasive rats, I said to them, that's probably ethically not a good idea and also could cause a lot of other problems. But we talk about what is being done and we give the real world examples. So my final point, really, I suppose, is that in the face of all of these really big and terrifying existential things that are happening in the world, people respond to enthusiasm. And I know it's hard. I know when we see everything screaming at us that things are going wrong and things are bad. But especially for people who aren't necessarily engaged in science in their day-to-day life, if they see your passion and your enthusiasm, then they will be passionate and enthusiastic as well. So thank you very much for listening.
One of the questions? Perhaps the only question that everyone wants the answer to is how do we get an outfit like that? Oh, hi. Thank you very much for that. Anybody have a question in the audience? Or online? Yep.
Oh, hang on.
Oh,
Wait, there's one at the back.
Okay. Hi, thank you for a great talk. That was just fantastic and very inspiring, by the way.
Thank you.
But my question is about teachers. And so you mentioned about, shutting people down and that, when you're faced with a question that you can't answer. So my interaction with teachers, the biggest, I suppose, obstacle, to their delivering, I suppose, really quality informative education is, especially in relation to ecology and anything to do with the outdoors, is faced with the fear of not being able to answer a question. So how do you, or what would you say about that? Or how do you address that, especially with teachers?
That's a really good question. And do you know what? It is something that has cropped up for me before, especially when I leave myself open to open Q&A, especially about space, which I'm a zoologist, space is not my topic. I get questions that are so out there that I would never be able to know the answer to, but that in itself is great because I say, do you know what? I don't know the answer to that question. And I say, let's research it together. So I will then, while I'm on the call for that session, I will go and look up. I'll tell them the sources I'm using. I say, I'm going to this website, I'm having a look. Oh, I can see it's saying this. What do we think about that? And then we have a chat about it. So it's that thing of, teachers don't have to be all knowing in the same way that museum educators don't have to be all knowing. And that's something I try and get across to teachers is if you are asked a tricky question, there are places you can go to. And it's something that I have said to teachers in the past is you have my email address. If there's a question that you're not sure about, have fun putting together some questions, send them over to me and I'll type out an answer for you. So I think it's making teachers aware that there are resources available to them, even outside of their traditional sources of information. They can come, even if they're not coming on a visit, drop me an email, and I know not everyone has the resources to do that, but it's about filling teachers with the confidence that there are many possible sources of information out there in the same way that I would with the children too. Thank you.
There's a couple of online questions. I noticed
Majority of your teaching collection seems to be animal oriented. What provision have you made to inspire your young audience about plants?
That is a great question. So to answer that, I did have a workshop called Plant Power that I ran not long after I started at the museum. And the problem that I have is I am not allowed to have fresh plant specimens in my workshops because of pest concerns. And herbarium sheets weren't giving me the kind of tactile element that I wanted for the children. So I actually teamed up with a local artist and we made some resin coated plant specimens. So it was kind of an experimental process. She tried out dehydrating things and then covering them in a very thin layer of resin. And that did work for some things. I've got some great seaweed specimens that I collected up the North Coast that I can use in my workshops. The succulents did not end well. Watching a piece of cactus slowly rot inside resin is not pleasant. But it's something that I want to do. I want to add more plant specimens to the teaching collection for sure, but it's an ongoing process. Thank you.